We're now going to move to hydrocarbons, which is the dominant flavor of energy. It's the one that has been the dominant flavor for a very long time. And we're going to talk about the change that has happened and the change that will happen. And we've got a couple of great leaders and experienced people to help us think about those issues. So Dan Brulette, you knew him as the president of Sempra Infrastructure. He was also Secretary of Energy. More recently, he's become the CEO of the Edison Electric Institute. So we will probably get into a little bit of power. We can't help but not do that with Dan with us. And then we've also got Tim Leach. And most of you, I'm sure, know Tim from his Texas roots, his Permian roots, but he was certainly part of the shale revolution. He founded and created Concho, which was one of the absolute leaders in the shale revolution. And then Concho has merged with ConocoPhillips. I don't want to get in trouble with Ryan. And now he'll talk about kind of the new platform and how he sees it from there. So we've got two fantastic guests to talk about the old flavor and what's new in the old flavor. So can I get a round of applause for Tim and Dan? Well, guys, that was a great first panel and great discussion to kind of remind us of why we need hydrocarbons so much. You know, I did mention in the intro that the two of you, the two companies, are partners in LNG in Port Arthur. Maybe that's one place to start. And maybe, Dan, I'll go to you. So LNG, if you go back, 10-something years ago, we really weren't talking about, we were talking about the U.S. having a lot of gas, but we weren't talking about the U.S. impacting the world in the way it is right now with LNG, much less basically, dare I say, saving Europe in the middle of a war. Talk to us about LNG from your perspective. You've seen it evolve. You saw it in Washington, then you saw it at Sempra. Just maybe kick us off on that flavor and tell us how you're thinking about it right now.
Sure. Well, thank you, Maynard, and great to see you again, Tim. It's a fascinating place in which we live. But first, let me just start by thanking the KBH Center for inviting me here today, and thank you, Maynard, for being our moderator and host. It's fantastic to be here. This is a great university, a great school, and very proud to be here as small part of a program that you're going to host. The world has changed dramatically. I mean, I can't overstate how much it's changed. When Mike Pompeo and I traveled around the world 5 years ago, I guess now, 4 years ago, trying to impress upon Europeans, Germany in particular, that we felt that given the intelligence that we were seeing day in and day out, they had become a bit too dependent upon Gazprom and a bit too dependent upon Russian gas. Given the doctrinal changes and the plans that we could see Mr. Putin talking about around the world, we were literally thrown out of their offices. Literally thrown out of their offices. And no one wants to sit here 5 years ago and say, hey, I told you so. That's not the point of this conversation. My point in raising it again is just really to applaud the Germans and to applaud the Europeans for the dramatic turn that they've made in the last year. In particular, Minister Habeck has, I think, done a great job, given his political constituency, if you will, coming from the Green Party, of suspending, in certain cases, environmental regulations that allow regas facilities to be built in the northern part of Germany. It's a recognition of the world in which we live. And I think as we look forward and we look down the road, that realism, that pragmatism is going to continue, which leads into some of the conversations I think that Mike Cymbalus was talking about. I don't know if he's still in the room. Mike, I didn't realize I wasn't qualified to be the U.S. Secretary of Energy, by the way. I don't know if he's still here.
Dan, I was hoping you were getting coffee during that.
That was funny to hear. Like, wow, okay. Grew up a pipeline welder. I'm an economist. I do modeling all day. I have a master's degree in national security, but somehow, okay, whatever. Anyway, got off track there for a minute, sorry. No, I think, what Mike was talking about, what he was, suggesting that the demand for things like natural gas, hydrocarbons in particular, are going to continue. I think that's true because of the pragmatism that Europe now see and the rebalancing that's occurring between climate policy and energy security or national security policy. That rebalancing is going to continue, I think, for the next 10 to 15 years because the world has become, candidly, a more dangerous place.
Dan, does it rebalance because at some level every participant in it, slows down and thinks it through, or does it rebalance because the people who are more focused on certain issues basically get more influence in the discussion? So does the climate community increasingly say, well, wait a minute, we were going too fast, wait a minute, I like natural gas because after all it's better than, do you think, is that where we are?
Yeah, I think that drives most of the conversations that I've seen anyway, at least the conversations I've had as president of Semper Infrastructure. When I go into foreign countries and I promote the use of U.S. LNG and candidly promote the products that my company helps to develop, the export facilities, I see folks talking more realistically about what natural gas does in the marketplace. It provides, in the case of electricity generation, baseload firm power, keeping the lights on 24/7. It does, in many cases, places like Poland in particular, reduce the carbon emissions of those particular countries, which allows them to meet 2030, 2040, 2050 environmental goals. So there's a more practical understanding of the benefits there. Now, I heard some of the conversation around methane emissions, and Michael's absolutely correct. I mean, the benefits of natural gas replacing coal are in some cases offset by those methane emissions. But the industry, I think, is being very aggressive in addressing that issue. And he's absolutely correct about the technology because we helped develop some of them with regard to both the emissions signature, finding out what is actually the emissions signature, moving away from estimates, which is what we've done for the last 30 to 40 years, to actual numbers that we can quantify and that we can capture, and developing the technologies that allow us to capture that gas because we have the economic incentive to do so. Not only do we want to be compliant with regulations, if we can capture it and put it back in the pipeline, we can sell it. So there's a rational reason for us to do it this way. And I know I can speak for the U.S. industry and my company in particular. We are very aggressive in pursuing those technologies.
So Tim, I was just thinking, and we talked about this briefly yesterday, you and I met in, I think it was 2006 or 7. Concho at that time was a private company. From those early days, you went on to take Concho public. Concho became a Permian, superstar company. The world has changed so much in the time since we met. And one of the things that's now I'm sure is part of your world, it's part of your why you did the transaction with Conoco, is Concho is now part of ConocoPhillips, and ConocoPhillips is doing LNG, and so your world has just gone from a handful of counties in 2006 to the planet.
Right.
I mean, talk to us a little bit about some observations on that journey.
And let me also say that I'm really pleased to be here. It's an unusual venue for me, being an Aggie, being invited into this this kind of environment. But
there's a diversity joke in there somewhere.
But and I really enjoyed last night seeing my friend Secretary Evans being honored, and what a great night that was. So that was a lot of fun. And I think we started talking. I went out to the Permian Basin a long time ago and stayed, and it's a remarkable place. And but when you think about what does the energy company of the future need to look like, Ryan and I started talking about that many years ago, and I think we both realized that neither one of us had a company that had the legs on it to be the company of the future. And having the Permian exposure, having the unconventionals and the shales matched up with Alaska, Canada, Norway, Australia, and that base production really makes a strong company. I never would have dreamed that you could build an energy company that has a depleting resource where you could return 50% of your cash flow to your shareholders and still grow the thing 4 or 5% a year. I mean, that's a pretty compelling business model, even at kind of mid-cycle commodity prices. And so the LNG thing was something that we were looking at the Permian, that today the Permian's making between 17 and 18 Bs a day. And it's all associated gas. I haven't intentionally drilled a gas well in probably 20 years. You know, it's all comes with the oil production that we're making. And that's projected to go up fairly dramatically, add another maybe 10 Bs a day over the next decade or so. You have to find a market for that. And when you look at the combination of what we're doing in the lower 48 with gas production and what ConocoPhillips had around the world, whether it's in Qatar or Australia, and you know, we've been in the LNG business for 60 years in the company. You can really build a pretty compelling business around that. But I think from my standpoint, we're going to make so much gas, associated gas, you really have to find a way to have the infrastructure to transport it out of the lower 48 and get it to a market. And I think that's going to be one of our greatest challenges.
Are you surprised because so many of Michael's comments around transmission, nuclear, so many things, just industrial activity, there was this theme in there of how hard it is to build stuff. But yet we have built LNG facilities. What would you tell us about the environment for either one of you guys, about the environment to build more, to do more, to keep expanding, to keep growing that capability here in the U.S.?
Well, you know, building connective infrastructure is difficult. We already have, thank goodness, we already have a lot of the right-of-ways and infrastructure to get resources out of the Permian Basin, a 100-year-old oil field, to the coast. So that's, but we need to add to that every single year. I do think, you know, going back to 2015 when we did the lifting of the export ban on oil, part of the compelling argument for that was helping free societies around the world have access to fuel. And so I still think that's an LNG theme that's going to be a compelling theme, that we have the resource here and we are building and can continue to build resource infrastructure to move that to people who need it. And I like that story.
Mm-hmm. It's a good story. I think we can do more. I applaud what the Congress attempted to do with some of the NEPA changes and some of the permitting changes that they made as part of the recent debt limit conversation. I think there's still more to do. When we look at the United States, you know, and Tim mentioned this, you know, the amount of gas that's coming out of the Permian today is just amazing. The production question in America, I think, has largely been solved. You know, it's no longer the issue that it was when I was growing up as a kid in the 70s and 80s. So production is solved. What's challenging for us right now is getting that product to market. It's the infrastructure development that we need. The pipeline capacity, I think, is still lacking. We need to be able to get that product to the open market. And there is a strong demand all around the world for this product. As we look, again, I mentioned Poland earlier, as we look at Poland and it continues its divorce from Russia, they're going to need more and more power as they grow that economy. Europe is going to need more and more power as they grow their economy. And we're in the perfect position to provide it. Today, however, in America, it just takes too long. I mean, I think it was Alan Armstrong who said on public TV, and if I'm incorrect about that, I know there's some Williams people in the audience. If I'm incorrect, I'll stand corrected, but I thought it was Alan who said that at times it takes them longer to get the permit than it does to build the pipeline. That's a problem. And you know, if that's true and if that continues in America, we're going to be in a difficult situation here, you know, perhaps in the next decade.
So Dan, maybe I could ask you, because this idea of, or the problem of how hard it is to build stuff, whether you're, no matter what flavor you're a fan of, this is a problem. Mm-hmm. So in a certain sense, regardless of what party you are, this is a problem. You've been in those Washington circles. You see how much permitting is a part of the problem in so many ways. Do you think we're going to be able to convince the American public and then therefore our politicians that, hey, you guys should solve this one? Like, are you optimistic there?
I am. I think, you know, your point is exactly correct. I mean, 10 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was a young Hill staffer helping draft some of the energy laws that now govern our industry, the conversations then from the environmental NGOs in particular was that we needed to stop permitting or reduce permitting of fossil energy infrastructure. You know, they were very adamant about that. And as the politics of America changed and the parties flipped, or the houses in both sides of the hill flipped control, from Republicans to Democrats, back to Republicans, back to Democrats. You saw a shifting of that policy. But what was constant in that conversation was that, environmental goals were being set. In order to meet them, you had to reduce the amount of usage, at least for purposes of, thermal production of electricity and things like that, of fossil fuels. You had to reduce them. So the permitting for the newer technologies then, and I'm talking 25, 30 years ago, what was new then was solar and wind, coming online. Permitting for that got easy. Permitting for fossil got hard. But what we saw was those hard policies that were putting in place for fossil were starting to be used by others to apply to renewable energy. And as they started to feel the pain of that permitting process, now there's a coalescing, there's a conflation that's happening in Washington. These two sides are coming together and saying, hey, we got a problem. Nothing is getting built. That's an overstatement, but that's the argument they're making. And I think as long as that continues to be the case, we'll start to see more and more bipartisan efforts to reduce the amount of permitting, or at least change the types of permitting that is, underway today. And one of the most important things I think, that we can find some agreement on, I think NEPA changes are important, but if we can get bipartisan agreement on changing things like judicial review and reducing the amount of litigation around some of these permitting processes, we will take a giant step forward to fixing the problem.
I was thinking, Tim, when Michael had that chart of countries and their dependence or independence, but just how they rank on that. In the U.S., this stunningly sort of dependent country that then became independent, and it's the only country on that chart that did that. And I was thinking, as Dan was talking, that didn't require a single government permit, right? It happened on private land. Reflect on the shale revolution a little for us, because it was, when you think about the last 50 years maybe, this was the single biggest event in energy history, and it's really changed the geopolitics of all this. But
right. Well, one of the comments earlier was that the shale revolution started under Dallas, as far as having an uneconomic active, but the technology of drilling horizontally, the fracking technology, those kinds of things kind of changed the dynamics. And I would say that as it applied to the Permian Basin, as it applied to oil, nobody thought it would work. And the idea that oil molecule could move through the rock, that was common knowledge that wasn't going to work. And so the whole shale revolution didn't happen at a big company. The majors didn't see it. It didn't happen in labs. It happened with people out in the field experimenting. And I remember, EOG started in the Permian Basin on the Midland Basin side and had kind of an unsuccessful project in Crockett County, and everybody looked at that and said, yeah, we knew that wasn't good. But then you started to hear whispers, this is probably 2008, 2009, of small independents drilling wells in New Mexico. I had one of my friends call me and say, have you seen that well I drilled in Carlsbad? And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, well, I've gone out 500 feet horizontal, haven't fracked it, it's making 300 barrels a day. And I said, what zone are you in? And he said, I don't know. So in about a decade's time, we've gone from not knowing how that mechanic was going to work. The oil production in the Permian was below 1 million barrels a day. Today it's almost 6 million barrels a day. It will probably plateau out at between 7 and 8 million barrels a day. But in the early stages, we started looking at it and drilling, and we probably drilled 3 or 4 wells scattered around the Delaware Basin. And I got my board together, and those wells came in making, 1 mile laterals. They came in making 1,500 barrels a day, which was unheard of. And we got the board together and said, I want to show you 4 wells that I think may change everything. And as a company, you have to say, okay, we have these 4 data points. What are you going to do with it? It's huge news, but how do you run a business around that? That was a really interesting time. But then I gathered up some of my biggest shareholders from California, and I got a King Air, and we flew from Artesia down to the Davis Mountains, right down the middle of the Delaware Basin. I said, look out the window, and it's like a couple of 100 miles. There wasn't a road, there wasn't a power line, but there was one drilling rig sitting out there in the middle of that. And so when you had that 1,500 barrel a day well that you were trying to figure out, what does this mean? There wasn't a pipeline to put anything in. So 10 years ago, we were flaring everything as you made the discovery, and then you had to wait for infrastructure to get to you, which took several years. Today, we're not flaring anything. You know, you don't turn the well on unless you have a place to produce the gas. We got our routine flaring down to zero, basically, and it's a huge. And that all happened in a decade. But trying to understand the dynamic from going to discovery and what does it mean, and how many zones and how do you space it and what's the mechanics of all of it, to how do we do this cleanly? How do we make sure that we don't have any methane emissions? The Delaware Basin was pretty undrilled for the most part. Over in the Midland Basin, lots of old vertical wells. We've talked a lot about one of our biggest problems as an industry is old abandoned wells that leak methane that no one claims that they own, and that we need to go back in and plug those things. And I think our detection and our evaluation has gotten so much better. And I think that, you know, we will go through a phase of cleaning up the mess that was made over the last 100 years, and I think it's going to get a lot better.
Tim, I was going to say, you know, whether it's methane or financial returns, it's a common thing you hear in the world that ESG's gone too far, and the financial community is just, you know, they're just too difficult to. There's a lot they don't understand. However, it does seem like the oil and gas companies of today are quote, better companies than you might have said they were, you know, 10 plus years ago. They're more financially focused. Their operations in the field are lower impact. Like, what would you say about the evolution of an oil and gas company and how much, how the companies have improved, basically, how the industry has improved?
Right. I mean, it's really complicated because everything's changed so much. You know, you pick up the Wall Street Journal a few months ago, and a company called Mewbourne and a company called Endeavor combined were running more rigs than Exxon and Chevron. Well, why you know, small private companies, you know, pressing on the accelerator when everybody else is showing caution about reinvesting capital. So the nature of the companies are changing. This is a big company game now. There's fewer and fewer independents like we used to be. Because of the regulatory burden, the environmental burden, you have to do it right, and it's a capital intensive business. The wells are really expensive. But on the social side, yeah, I think you know, we talked last night about how you see legends in this industry kind of going away over time. And there's a huge talent gap between the old people and the young people. But the young people are very, very talented. They just need us old guys to get out of the way so they can step up and do some things. And I'm sure there are legends sitting in this room that are probably in their 20s and 30s that are just looking for a chance.
They're just waiting for this panel to end.
That's right. So I think you'll get back to work. But I do think the pushback from these big, if it's a big company game, we have suffered from corporate arrogance for decades. The notion that if I didn't think of it first, it must not be a good idea. That's something that I think will kill a company. And if you can't recognize it and feel it, that you have corporate arrogance, you got a problem. And then one thing I think that big companies don't do as well as small companies is just promote curiosity. I mean, that's how all this new stuff gets discovered. It's not, committees don't come up with the best answers. You need people that are curious, that are constantly asking questions, constantly exploring. And I think we have, as shown in and this organization and the people in this room, we have the ability to do that.
So this is a great topic to get on, because the shale revolution was a product of entrepreneurial people, entrepreneurial American spirit, markets, and people who said, why not? I'm going to try it. As you look at Michael's slides and all the flavors we're trying and all the experiments we're trying, all the ways in which this might work out, we have to have the entrepreneurial spirit if any of that stuff's going to work. But to your point, Tim, a lot of it is being done by really large companies that, if you're not careful, they can squash that. Dan, how do you think about this issue? You've seen a lot of organizations, including the government. How do you get people to ask the tough question, to take the risk, to stick their neck out? I mean, even what Michael was doing at some level, he's putting out opinions, which when you say hydrogen, that's not particularly popular in today's world. But how do you get people to take those personal and professional risks?
Wow, that's a great question. Look, I think, some of this is chicken and egg, right? I mean, you mentioned ESG earlier, so there's an argument that goes around state capitals and Washington that, without the government setting some regulation or some compliance rule, industry wouldn't do this, and some of that's true, I suppose. There's also, an element on the other side. It's the industry that innovates. It's the industry, as Tim mentioned, that, people like George Mitchell and others who took chances with fracking and took chances with horizontal drilling. Some of the technology was, developed perhaps in concert with Department of Energy laboratories, but it's the people in the field, it's the people in the industry that use that technology in innovative ways that produces the results that we're seeing either in the shale revolution. So it's a little bit of chicken and egg. They go hand in glove in certain respects. With regard to motivating people, I think Tim's absolutely right. It's questioning ourselves. I mean, it's looking at ourselves and looking at the opinions that we have and challenging those opinions. Sometimes we just become so ingrained in our thinking and so ingrained in the way that we've always done it that it simply can't be true that it can be done a different way, and that itself is not true. And it's just keeping that focus and staying curious about what's going on. And when I think about energy, when I think about not only hydrocarbons, I think about some of the things that we thought were not possible just 20 years ago. And I'm referring to things like fusion energy in the nuclear space. One of the most fascinating conversations that I had as Secretary of Energy was to think about how do we develop fuel sources for advanced nuclear reactors? How do we develop enrichment technologies that allow us to develop things like high-assay LEU, low-enriched uranium, that allow this reactor to become smaller, more dense, and produce electricity, in the case of nuclear technologies, 24/7 for 40, 50, 60 years without ever touching it again? Those are the types of innovative efforts that I think we all have to focus on.
So Tim, maybe because you touched on it, which is not only do we need entrepreneurial spirit, we need these young talented people to join.
Right.
And so we have a lot of them here in the room today. And when you think about the oil and gas industry, companies like ConocoPhillips, how do you reach out to these young people and say, okay, we're not a fusion company, we're not doing all these things that are, have so much sex appeal. We are a classic company, but yet we're a fantastic place to work. We're an innovative place to work. We're the kind of place where you can build your career and see all of this stuff. How's that going? Can we get the young people into energy that we need to make so many things happen?
Yeah, well, Gene Shepard and I were talking at the cocktail party last night about the enrollment decline in petroleum engineering, for example, and what a challenge that is. And it's a challenge for our colleges, I assume. But I think that we've never been very good at telling our story, I don't think. And we have a really compelling story. It's exciting for young people. It's a technology business. It's not that we're only doing oil and gas. I mean, we're investing in low carbon type of fuel. You can see lots of companies in our industry that are heavily investing into low carbon. Our LNG business is a new way to think about transitioning and adding more fuel over time to the rest of the world. So I think the story's compelling. We just need a better way to tell it, probably.
If I could just add to that real quick, I think about, I have a bunch of kids. For those of you that don't know, I have 9 kids. So we talk about energy all the time in my house. But one of the things that's exciting to them is helping us figure out how to decarbonize. So I can speak for Sempra, some of the things that we're working on. We want to move away from this, what we refer to as a very simplistic color scheme. Something's green, blue, turquoise, pink, whatever, pick a color, doesn't really matter. That doesn't mean anything in the marketplace. What's green in Europe is not green here, what's green here is not green somewhere else. It doesn't mean anything. So we've been focused on how do we quantify the carbon intensity of the product that we're putting into the marketplace? How do we get to a mathematical number that means something to either a buyer or a seller in the marketplace? And that sounds easy to do, but it is quite challenging to do that. So, as I think about, engineering programs here at UT or, other universities around the country, I urge students to think about those challenges, because the point of doing that is to help us with this industry, because it's going to be here for a very long time. We talk a lot about the energy transition. We talk a lot about, that word transition. And if you think about what it really means, what's the simplest definition of transition? It's usually moving from something to something else. Well, if you think about that in the context of energy history, never in humankind have we moved from one energy source to a completely different energy source. We use more biomass than people did 1,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago. Pick whatever time frame you want. We use more wood, we use more biomass than they did. And we have moved on a transition or on a spectrum from wood to coal, to oil, to gas, to nuclear, and yes, to renewable energies. But that transition has always been additive. It's never, with the possible exception of whale oil, which we still use in parts of the world, we've never moved completely away.
Fact. We don't have a whale oil panel today.
That's right. We've never moved away. So our challenge and our goal, my point in this is my challenge in this is don't fall into this trap that we're going to move completely 100% away from fossil fuels in your lifetime. I don't think that's going to happen. So let's get together and put the brightest minds around how do we figure out these tough challenges of quantifying the carbon molecule, helping us decarbonize these industries.
So Dan, I have to ask, how old are the kids? You got 9 kids.
My oldest is 31, my youngest is 10.
Okay, so that's a heck of an energy discussion over Thanksgiving.
Yes, it is.
So maybe one question, I think the other thing that people are struck by when you, again, go through like the slides that Michael had, and you look at all these ways that we could decarbonize and all these technologies and all these potential things. But yet one of the great ways to decarbonize, it's what we did here in the US, is we replaced coal with gas, right? It's like the go-to move. In football parlance, it's fullback up the middle, right? So why are we running the Statue of Liberty when, let's just do fullback up the middle. LNG helps the world take out coal. What would either of you tell us about your observations through your partnership or otherwise around getting LNG to the developing world or to any part of the world that wants to take out coal? Because again, it's the go-to move that decarbonizes but keeps your energy costs reasonable and keeps your energy reliable.
You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It has a twofold benefit. To the extent that it is displacing heavier hydrocarbons, be it coal or oil in certain cases, then yes, you have the positive environmental impact of that. But it also has a very large economic impact. I can tell you in my conversations with folks like the energy ministers in Lithuania, Estonia, and other places in the former Baltic nations, the mere announcement that they were going to consider building a regas facility in those countries forced Gazprom to reduce their prices by almost 50%. The mere announcement of that activity, providing competition in the marketplace, providing the access and the opportunity to buy from others, created an enormous economic impact. And I think that's important for developed countries like Europe, those in Europe, potentially in other places around the world, perhaps Southeast Asia, Vietnam, other places. Those are important elements to consider. But I also think, too, as we think about the developing nations, places in Africa, other parts of the world, they're going to need this vital fuel source. To the extent that we can provide natural gas from here in the United States or other parts of the world, I know Qatar is a big producer as well as Australia, and allow them to potentially leapfrog over some of the heavier, denser hydrocarbons, that's a positive environmental impact. They're not going to make that leapfrog as they are, today from wood to high-assay LEU, small advanced reactors. That's too far of a leap. But they can make that leap to natural gas. And I think as long as that's the case, and I think it will be for the next 20 to 30, perhaps even 40 or 50 years, that presents an enormous opportunity for our industry here in the United States.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I am also a fan of Vaclav's meal, and he points out a lot of things around coal that I think this year is going to be the highest year of coal production in the history of. So it's not like we're replacing coal and it's going away. It's which is a problem of sorts. The problem is how do we provide all the energy that the world needs, and Africa and India, they're going to they're going to grow in the energy consumption, and the infrastructure. I think the infrastructure is easier for coal. It's kind of already there, so I think we have a challenge. I think we can. We talked last night about leading. I think the United States can lead and show how to provide energy affordable and to our national security, our economy, and our environment. I think we can lead in that, but the rest of there will still be as much coal production and coal burning if we don't do a good job of leading.
Well, we're so obsessed with the energy production and usage patterns in the OECD, we forget the rest of the world, which is where really everybody lives, not in our neighborhood.
That's right. And
they're increasing their energy consumption.
I agree, Maynard. And if you haven't seen it yet, I think Dan Yergin just did a study that shows that this transition is not linear. It's not a straight line, that goes from one thing to another. Again, to my point about the definition of transition, it's much more complex than that. And it's complex because different countries are in different parts of their transition, if you will, or just different parts in their development of their economy. So you're not going to see this straight line jump.
So maybe we could talk about two other things, and Tim, I think they both fall with you, which is we mentioned needing entrepreneurship and we need better understanding of all these issues, but we need a better government-business relationship. I think it can always be improved. Dan, to your point, Tim, one of the phenomenal things that has happened in the last decade was the elimination of the ban on exporting U.S. oil. And that happened, at a time when we had mixed parties. It wasn't because, the elections had yielded a certain result. Think back on that, and what were some of the key ingredients in that? Because that was a really phenomenal thing. I also think the ban was put in place by Richard Nixon. That's our second theme this morning, a lot of talk about Richard Nixon. But reflect on that, because it was a phenomenal business government success, and you were present.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I think it was like the entire industry woke up one day when we answered the question, okay, what do these 4 wells mean in the Delaware Basin as far as what the future looks like? It's like the entire industry woke up together one morning and thought, my gosh, we got so much oil that's going to be produced and we don't have anywhere to go with it. We don't have a market. And so if we don't get the export ban, and I remember we had in Midland, we had a meeting, a separate meeting with the Speaker of the House. I'm drawing a blank.
Who would that have been? Was it?
Well, Paul Ryan came
Was it Nancy
separately.
Pelosi?
No. It was
At the federal level?
Boehner.
John Boehner.
So we made
Can we get a fleece over here?
Very good.
Thank you.
So we made the pitch that we need to be able to sell our oil, and here's why: it's a lighter grade, and we got these refineries and everything. And both of them said, "Well, you can't export crude oil." I mean, nobody knew that we had a ban that we couldn't move the crude outside the country, and they said, "Well, that's crazy." But then they also said, "You will never get that changed in 1,000,000 years. It's a hopeless cause." And that's the first time I met Ryan Lance. Actually, he headed up the PACE group in 2015, and but it's the first time all the companies kind of came together and said, we need to work on this together. There are a lot of egos in the room, a lot of CEOs in the room. He did a great job of pointing the ship in a direction, and it was amazing what you can get done when everybody is kind of unified and going in the same direction. But that was 2015. It was the Obama administration. It was probably the most important piece of legislation for our industry. I mean, can you imagine if the export ban was not lifted, the shale revolution never would have happened because there'd be no place to go with all the oil. The differential between European oil and U.S. oil would have been giant. And where would we be today with the Ukrainian situation if we were still making 5 or 6 million barrels a day instead of 13 million barrels a day?
So can I ask you, Tim, just while we're on oil, right? We've talked a lot about gas, but let's talk about oil for a minute. Michael pointed it out. We've had investment in oil, in hydrocarbons broadly, but investment in oil is down, right? It's a depleting resource. When you look at the screen, you don't see other things that are going to show up instantly and replace oil. Oil is the most fungible, usable, versatile, kind of multifaceted energy product we have. It seemingly the outlook for oil prices and demand seems quite good, but it also seems a little concerning because we have underinvested and we might be doing some really poor planning here as a country and as a nation around oil. We've also run the SPR down to half of what it was just a couple of years ago. How do you think about oil markets, oil price stability? Just talk to us about oil.
So how long have you and I been doing this? Long time, right?
Yes, sir.
And as soon as everybody thinks oil's going to be 100, what usually happens?
Yeah, something's going to mess it up.
Yeah, oil goes to 30 or something like that.
Yeah.
So
So this is the sign oil's going to 30. I asked the question.
So we're still, I think it's public information, we're running our mid-cycle oil price at 60 or 65 or something like that. So when you look back over what price do you think would balance the market, it's way lower than where we are today. But for all the reasons that you point out, it seems like that there's less investment, the capital formation is different. Everybody wants you to return a large portion of your cash flow back to shareholders. When I was younger, I used to read the Oil and Gas Journal, and I'd turn to the back, and it would show you all the big discoveries that were going on around the world. There aren't that many big discoveries. There's not that much exploration going on. There's not that much new creation. Now, the good thing for us is what we have in the United States, the shale basins and everything, and it's multi-layered. Our recovery in every instance is less than 15%. So there's a tremendous amount of crude oil. One of the things that really blows me away in the Permian, for example, discovery well was in the 1920s, so it's been 100 years. The Permian in the first 100 years produced 30 billion barrels. And the shale recovery factor today is over 100 billion barrels. So, as smart as we are, we've been working at this for 100 years, and we have 3x the reserve that we've produced over the last 100 years. We're in pretty good shape in that regard. And I think there's still new zones coming on.
Maybe let's just grab that topic while we're there, which is because if you replay the shale revolution, we did do this. Well, it's kind of the Barnett. Okay, it's the Barnett and the Haynesville. Okay, maybe it's the Marcellus. Well, it's really just gas. It's not oil. Okay, actually, it's oil like we did like that. The other thing we're doing now is we're saying, well, eventually the U.S. is going to slow. Like we're counting out again, I think, in some circles, the U.S. industry. Are you optimistic for technological change that really gives a next leg up?
Oh, for sure. And it's impossible, I think, to predict exactly how it unfolds. But what we're seeing is incremental improvements on all fronts. I mean, I would have told you 5 years ago that a 1 mile lateral is kind of optimal, and that was all wrong. We're routinely drilling 3 mile laterals now. The economics are improved, the recoveries are improved. Fracking technology, we used to say, oh, you gotta get your sand from Wisconsin, or if you don't have Wisconsin sand. So we don't buy any Wisconsin sand anymore. It's, most of the things we thought we knew and we took for granted through experimentation, we learned those kind of things are hard to predict. And but incremental improvements in all facets of our business, I think, hold a lot of hope. There's still a giant target out there of resource, and you got, we're still drilling hundreds of wells a year, and that's where the big improvement comes. The big breakthroughs. Somebody out there is drilling to a zone that no one's ever heard about before. Somebody's using a technique that no one's ever tried before, and you really have to keep your ear to the ground, because that's where the breakthroughs come from.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, let me remind all of you, if you have a question, please fire it in. We've got the iPad handy. We'll see your question. Dan, maybe one question for you. When you think about the landscape over the next 10 years and what's going to change, so much of this is, TBD. Right. But one of the things that looks like it is clearly going to change is the amount of LNG we export from the U.S. Mm-hmm. Like I want to say the current number is about 15
Yeah,
Bs
I think
so.
I think that's about right. We just became the largest exporter in the world.
But if you look at the numbers and the projections, like this number is going way up. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about how you see that affecting everything that is connected to that, because that is a very visible variable that, mm-hmm. by all accounts, is nothing's for sure, but that one looks like, okay, that's changing. How do you think about that?
Well, I think it's very positive, obviously, for America, but positive for companies like ours as well. I think there's a debate that occurs. Recently, Freeport had an unfortunate situation where they came offline, and the arguments were made, well, these exports are producing higher prices here in America, that gas is going overseas rather than staying at home. It's raising prices here artificially. And when you look at the data, you saw a little jump in the pricing of gas at that point in time. I think what that severely discounts is, to Tim's point, American innovation, this industry's innovation, the ability to produce cheaper, the ability to claim these resources much more efficiently than we have in the past. Tim just mentioned, looking at 1 mile and 2 mile, lengths for drilling horizontally. I was just reading a story, I think this week, where Range Resources is now shooting for 25,000 feet. You think about that, that was unheard of just a few years ago. That type of innovation, I think, is discounted in those public statements about what this industry can do. If we allow the infrastructure to be built here in the United States, if we develop our pipeline capacity, if we encourage the innovation that we just talked about, the pricing comes down, the product becomes more available worldwide, Americans benefit, and our allies around the world benefit. We talked a little bit about oil. I can tell you firsthand, I was the secretary when oil prices went negative, negative $37 a barrel. And I had a president who was calling every 5 minutes, hey, what are you doing about this? And I had to explain to him, there's not much I can do as a cabinet minister, to fix this situation. But my point in saying that is that, not only did we think about the economics of oil and the economics of natural gas and what it means to Americans in their everyday lives, we need to start thinking more about it in terms of foreign policy and what it allows the United States to do. Because when OPEC and when Saudi Arabia and Russia got into their little spat, I saw a president firsthand have options to deal with that, candidly, when I was a young assistant secretary in the Bush administration, I don't think he had the options he probably wanted at the time, and before that, obviously, as well. So it's a very complex, a very all-encompassing situation that we deal with.
So at this point,
can I ask
yes, sir,
one
please.
thing? One of the things, and I'd be interested in your view on this, the decisions we're going to have to make going forward, it has a lot to do with shipping. How many ships do you need to buy? How many? What kind of ships? How big? Do you need ships that can get through the Panama Canal, or are you going to build a pipe to get to the Pacific? And with the Jones Act, if you build Jones Act ships, you can ship to New York and Boston. Right. But they're more expensive. If you don't think you're going to ship to New York and Boston, you can, build cheaper ships. How do you see that?
My personal view is the Jones Act is a bit antiquated. I know there's probably some folks who disagree with that vehemently, but that's my personal view. I think it was well intended when it was written many, many years ago. And I come from Louisiana. At the time it was a big shipbuilding part of the world. But I think its time has come. I mean, when we look at Russian LNG ships sitting in Boston Harbor, for instance. And it's insane to think that we can't move that gas from the Gulf of Mexico to Boston Harbor.
We were having a shipping industry conversation this week, and I brought up the Jones Act, and boy, the room went quiet like, oh God, please, we can't talk about that because there's so much passion around it.
I know there is.
Can I ask you a question, Dan, because you touched on it, which is the integration of foreign policy and energy, which is really interesting because it sort of seems like what's been going on in energy policy is we had a very strong environmental opinions were being expressed, and then we've added security and we've added economics, and then there's foreign policy. And if we get the foreign policy right, our relations with India, our relations with Saudi, like how do we integrate energy better into the foreign policy wing of the
I think, I don't know how we do it better. If I had that answer, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. No, it's a very difficult question. I think what we need to do is exactly what's happened over the last year or so. Again, it's recognizing and be more practical about energy policy. I mean, for a few years, I think we approached in the United States, at least in Europe, I'm absolutely certain, we viewed energy policy through the singular prism of climate policy. And that's, in my view, the wrong approach. I think it's important for us to broaden ourselves out and think about energy policy much more differently. I mean, everybody in this room clearly knows that energy policy is really the foundation of almost every economy in the world. I mean, if you think about inflation and what's happened over the course of the last year or two, you can, I think, draw a pretty straight line to the price of diesel, the price of refined gasoline, to the ultimate outcome, which is higher inflation and higher cost of products all around the world. It is that foundational and that fundamental to every economy. So if we approach it with that sense and with that understanding, then I think we come to common ground fairly quickly. And Michael mentioned Ernie Moniz earlier, and Ernie's a really good friend of mine. He and I were on a panel at Columbia University just recently, and we were asked, when you helped write the 05 Energy Act, for instance, and Ernie and I had a lot to do with that, and when we did other energy bills, and I think, to Tim's point about how how the Congress reached a landmark agreement to lift the export ban, all of those conversations started in the middle, the political middle. We started with the understanding that the country needs more energy. And then you start asking the secondary questions. Well, how are we going to get it? Where do we need to go in the political spectrum to build support for the fundamental understanding that we need more energy to build our economy? And that's the approach that we took. And today, sometimes in politics, we tend to take the opposite approach. We start from the outside and we try and find the middle. And you have, congressmen, with all due respect, coming to you at times saying, well, if my provision's not in the bill, I'm not voting for it. Well, you're not going to get very far in that conversation. But if you can start from this fundamental understanding that energy matters to our economy, you can usually find the middle ground. You can usually find a way to move these policies forward.
And the really interesting thing about making energy policy with climate first is it's not even clear you help the climate, right? Like it has to be a holistic solution or you're going to have a systemic problem. You're going to do this in a certain area. We're going to use more coal over here, et cetera.
Yeah. Or the lights are going to go off.
Or lights.
So, I mean, that's the other challenge, right? I mean, you can jump intellectually to the possibility that you may have a 100% renewable world in which to operate. If you don't mind the lights going off in the interim. And, that's something that I think, again, the practicality of energy policy, we need to have.
So, Tim, you touched on this, and this is part of Dan's comment there, which is energy education, energy knowledge, energy understanding, making decisions from the middle, which will have, baked in a lot of good knowledge. But you also referenced that oil and gas hasn't done as good a job as it could have, explaining the issues, explaining its perspective, being proactive. What do you think about solving that? Is oil and gas getting better at that? Is society starting to understand things better? How do we solve this energy education gap?
I don't know if we're getting better at it because I think, the world doesn't want to hear from an oil and gas CEO. I think that if I start talking or someone else starts talking, we're immediately discounted because we're just talking our books. And but I do think, I think our greatest hope is reality eventually wins, right? And I think the world is waking up to more reality. You can watch what's going on in Europe. the consequences of those decisions. And I think it's time that we really have a serious conversation in our country about what's best for our country to balance our economy, our need for national security, and our need for a clean environment. And I don't think we can lead that conversation. We need to be a voice in that conversation, but there needs to be some leaders that come together that start from the middle and say there needs to be a great compromise, and we can do this. We can balance our economy, our national security, and our environment, but it's going to have to be a compromise. And the industry, I can talk about how much crude oil we're going to make and how much we can make and what the economics are and what the challenges are, and I can talk about that. But as far as that big balance that's in the best interest of our country, I think you need to pull leaders together that have a different voice of sorts.
Well, I heard reality wins, I heard great compromise, and then I heard doing it in the best interest of the country, which is something we could all do better with. So.
You're saying I could have been more concise?
No. I'm saying you gave us 3 nuggets that we're grabbing those and running with them. Well, Dan and Tim, thank you so much. It's fascinating. We really appreciate it. If I get a round of applause for
Thank
you
you
guys.
Thank you, Brother.